Hello, everyone, once again for another episode of BVM Sports Chalk Talk. This is episode number 17. We are really getting things rolling here at Chalk Talk and appreciate all of our viewers. I'm Lucas Semb here with Scott Procter and Matt Morris. And even though the NFL season is over, there will hardly be an offseason this year with trade rumors already circulating. This week, we will talk about J.J. Watt and Russell Wilson and then transition to college hoops as March Madness quickly approaches. But first, let's talk about J.J. Watt. He'll begin a fresh start elsewhere as the Houston Texans continue to make headlines for the wrong reasons. Scott, where do you think J.J. Watt will end up when it's all said and done?
Yeah, Luke, super interesting. When I saw JJ's announcement on social media, the Green Bay Packers immediately came to my mind. It might be somewhat predictable, but it's hard to ignore the impact that coming home has had on professional athletes. Watt is obviously from Wisconsin, and, he told Peter King as recently as 2019 that playing at Lambeau Field is a dream he's had since a kid. Suiting up for his childhood team with a legitimate chance to win the Super Bowl after all the individual success he's had is an opportunity I just don't envision him easily passing up on. On the field, this makes just as much sense. JJ turns 32 in March. He's had a long injury history. He won't be playing every down, but second and long, third down is where JJ can still be an elite threat as a pass rusher. And this Packers defense has enough depth and personnel around him to allow him to play that role. JJ was double-teamed more than any other edge rusher in the NFL last season, about 30% of his snaps. Zadarius Smith was second at about 27% of his snaps. That alone should entice the Packers to make this happen. And, like I tweeted right after JJ's announcement, a defensive line that features Kenny Clark, J.J. Watt, and one or both of the Smith brothers is nasty. Green Bay, make that happen.
Well, I have to. It begs the question: how are they going to make it happen financially? Because the Packers,
it'll take some work. It'll take some work.
They have to prioritize Corey Linsley.
Correct.
Aaron Jones is on the block or on the free agent wire, so they're going to have to make a move at him, and they're losing wide receivers. So somewhere they're going to have to fill holes. And I don't know if Watt fits that mold for them.
Yeah, I mean, it'll take some cap gymnastics, but like we talked about on the show, Corey Linsley is a priority. But, other than that, I don't really see too many unrestricted free agents that are of need. We've talked about Aaron Jones, and my thoughts on him. He's been a great Green Bay Packer. I love what he's done for the franchise. But, with the way the running back room looks right now, Jamal Williams is also a free agent, but he'll appear to be a cheaper option along with, A.J. Dillon coming in his second year. I want to see more of him. So, Corey Linsley, once he's on the books, the Packers need to make a splash. They've been stuck for a little bit here as a franchise. And, I think for my lifetime, I haven't really seen them make that splash move. But, J.J. Watt would fill a need, and it would be that splash move.
I understand your point, but, in what I think the issue is that the Packers did make a splash, and that splash was re-signing Kenny Clark and David Bakhtiari. Those were the big free agency signings and they just happened earlier in the season. That was what you had to do. I don't know if they're going to be able to free up enough. If you want to, I
don't know if re-signing guys who are already on your roster. I wouldn't know if I would consider that a splash, but I'll let you continue though.
I mean, that is what I think was the most important thing as far as the Packers returning and being
important for sure.
A contender. And for J.J. Watt, I think that he obviously wants to be with a contender. The Packers are a good example. Another contender is a team that made it to the AFC title game. I think he should look at the Bills. I think the Bills are a legitimate option.
Hey, Bills Mafia doesn't deserve J.J. Watt, man. I'll tell you that right now. He doesn't. He's going to be 32. He wants to go somewhere to win. He doesn't want to be stuck in the AFC title game.
On a young team that made it to the AFC title game, and just to show what they need to do, they understand how to beat Mahomes now. I think everybody somewhat understands. Obviously, you need a strong second. You need a great defense, and right now the Bills. Only thing that they have an issue with is their front seven, that defensive line. Watt would have entered this team, the Bills team this year, and would have been one of their best defensive ends on the team. He had 5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 52 total tackles. Scott, as you mentioned, he was the most double-team player. By bringing him in, it frees up the rest of that defensive line, helps Jerry Hughes out, and then also will allow those great pieces they have in their linebacking group and their secondary, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, White, and Matt Milano, and Tremaine Edmonds. Like, those guys will be able to take advantage of that. And also, to your point, he's 32. Sean McDermott's defense, the way that he runs it, is very rotational. So he's not going to be the guy and have to play every snap. He'll be rotated in and out, and he'll be able to have a nice longevity to that season. He won't get injured, and not only that, but there are very few guys. I think Tom Brady is probably the only one that comes to mind that when I think of just the impact they have in the locker room for a young Buffalo Bills team that is catching, fire and is playing very well and is young and talented and, is playing with the chip on their shoulder and knows that they can do something. J.J. Watt is the perfect guy to bring in. He will bring in a professionalism, and although he hasn't made it to an AFC title game or the Super Bowl, there is a lot of veteran leadership in the postseason that he can, bring to this Bills locker room, and it's just going to be exciting. And I think that the Bills have to be an option for him and a team that he looks seriously at, because adding J.J. Watt makes them even more of a contender than they already are.
You recovered well there from my early attack, Matt, I have to say. But the question I've heard debated a lot lately is, what is JJ's priority? Playing with his brothers or playing for a ring? And for whatever reason, people are forgetting those things aren't mutually exclusive. J.J. Watt can play with his brothers while competing for a ring. And, I think that's what's going to happen. He'll end up in Pittsburgh as a Steeler. That defense has proven time and time again they are one of the best in football with Cam Hayward, Stephon Tuitt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, who is an absolute savage. And, of course, JJ's brother TJ, who is the runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year, with lots of people saying he got snubbed, that he should have been the Defensive Player of the Year. Imagine that defensive front of the Watt and Hayward. Which way do you run? There's nowhere to go. You'll be forced to throw into that secondary that is equally as tough. And I think adding JJ there will not only, continue to make them one of the best defenses in the league, but it will allow them to fight for a title. People, quickly forget they started the year 11-0 before entering a complete downfall. This team has the weapons and the talent, and they just simply were playing their worst football at the wrong time. Whatever Big Ben has left in the tank is a big question still, so eventually that will need to get addressed. But the opportunity to play with this good of a team and his brothers is something that is probably very obviously at the front of JJ's mind. And knowing him, a Wisconsin guy, a family guy, knowing his family and how close they are, it seems to me like this is something that would be too good to pass up on. And the Steelers, of course, would want to get it done if he is interested.
Okay, so check it out. I get the familial connection and, that aspect. It's hard to ignore that, especially for a family that appears to be as close-knit as the Watts are. But, Luke, you just mentioned the Steelers, and you mentioned their 11-0 start to this past season. You were never a fan of the Steelers when they won 11 games in a row and went on that, miraculous run to start the season. You were never a believer that they were able to, surpass the Kansas City Chiefs or even make the Super Bowl. I can't imagine that you think adding J.J. Watt to their roster all of a sudden makes them a Super Bowl contender. And on the other side, Matt, again, I think we all agree here that J.J. Watt's priority, if not to play with his brothers, is to win a Super Bowl. That ain't happening in Buffalo. Sorry, Bills Mafia. This is not happening, especially with Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes in the AFC. I can't imagine J.J. Watt would go to any AFC team. He knows firsthand. He used to play for the Houston Texans, obviously. They had a nice little lead over Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs in the postseason not too long ago. I think he knows firsthand that Patrick Mahomes is not to be played with. I would imagine that he would go to the NFC, and that team has to be the Green Bay Packers.
I think, in my defense, I think that part of the reason that I wasn't a believer in the Steelers is because of their hot start. I don't think, they weren't the undefeated Patriots team that we saw with Brady. They weren't made like that. So their hot start, I didn't think they would be able to sustain that. And I think we saw that obviously come true. Now, I think throwing Watt in there just gives them a whole nother, a whole nother aspect where I think they could sustain it, because towards the end of the year, their defense was getting worn down. And I think adding J.J. Watt kind of fixes that problem.
It's not even the defense that worries me, though, Luke. It's that offense. I mean, that 11-0 start was not because of the offense. It was because the defense was that great. You will not hear me say anything bad about the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. They are impressive, and they are one of the best in the league. The offense is the issue. And adding J.J. Watt makes the defense better, but it's not going to help you score points. And
I think their offense is awesome. I think we can all agree with that.
After they lose Pouncey and Roethlisberger towards the end of his career, that was the issue. They were one-dimensional. They have no run game. Their O-line is very questionable. And, their weapons, as impressive as they were at points, if you just have to cover them deep and you take that out, that's what happens at the end of the season. I mean, you saw what happened to them against Cleveland in the playoffs. It became one-dimensional. It's just not – adding J.J. Watt would be awesome, and I'd love the defensive side of it and the story and the narrative, but it doesn't improve their offense, which is where they need to improve and use as much of their assets as they can to do that, because, you know, they have to restructure Ben Roethlisberger's contract, because no one is going to be paying $40 million for Big Ben at this point. And then, you know, Scott, to your point with the Packers, you know, he's still going to be playing a lot and have a lot of minutes, because they're going to have to move on from Preston Smith if they even want a chance at signing him, to remove salary cap space. And also, that means that you're going to basically have Zadarius Smith, Rashawn Gary, and J.J. Watt. And you're going to either have to lean heavy on Smith and Gary so that Watt has enough time to relax and to, you know, stay healthy.
I think that's feasible. I know we both talked about on the show that, you know, we've liked the progress that Rashawn Gary has, you know, made this past season. You know, I think he's due to, you know, see an increase in, you know, time played, and I think that'll bode well for JJ. Again, I think the depth and personnel on that defense is enough to where, you know, JJ Watt doesn't have to be worn down by, you know, week 17 or when the playoffs come around. You know, you can kind of, you know, manage his minutes, you know, and utilize, you know, kind of the younger guys on that side of the ball.
Well, I think all realistic options. We got 12 teams considering them right now, but on the offensive side of the ball, a name that we didn't quite think we'd hear pop up this offseason, Russell Wilson. He expressed his concern with the Seahawks and their inability to protect him in the pocket throughout his career. And the Seahawks management responded saying they were upset with Russell Wilson. Matt, what do you make of this whole ordeal?
You know, I think this is a lover's quarrel. I mean, I don't see Russell Wilson and the Seahawks ever parting ways. I think that, you know, if Wilson, you know, I guess could have gone to the front office, I guess that would have been better. But you know what? I think Wilson just said what everyone in the whole world that watches football knows, which is Russell Wilson has had no protection basically since, you know, they were going to Super Bowls.
And you know what, Matt, you're right. Going to the front office would have been better. But here's what I'm thinking. He probably has gone to the front office.
Oh, yeah. And that's why I have no problem. Yeah. No, I have no problem with what Russell Wilson did. And the fact that the front office is going to act like they're upset and be mad about it, it's ridiculous. It's just Wilson is pointing out what everyone and their mother knows, which is the Seattle Seahawks have not had a good O-line in, I don't know, like 5 years. Like, it's just ridiculous. He is your franchise quarterback. He has probably, to your point, Luke, come to them and said, hey, help me out. And they can't figure it out. They've tried to. They just have failed miserably at it.
Yeah, I mean, so, man, I think you assessing this situation as somewhat of a lover's quarrel is a bit naive. Listen, the Seattle Seahawks, and specifically Pete Carroll, better be careful, because based on Russell Wilson's comments here recently, he seems stuck. And in an era of quarterback autonomy, look at Matt Stafford, Tom Brady wanting out and getting to their destination, and now even Deshaun Watson. That's not a feeling you want your franchise quarterback to have. I say stuck because the Seahawks haven't made it past the divisional round since 2014. Russell Wilson has been the most sacked quarterback since 2017, and he's taken almost 400 sacks in the Seahawks uniform. Yes, Russ's play style, extending plays and getting out of the pocket contributes to that, but that's not entirely on him. But more importantly, I bring up Pete Carroll at the jump because this is a 69-year-old man who will be 70 by the time the Seahawks suit up next season, who the last time was in the Super Bowl, he chose to throw the ball on the half-yard line instead of run with beast mode. They haven't recovered since. The franchise has not recovered since that moment. Fast forward to after this past season, Pete Carroll says his team has to run the ball more, which is ridiculous given the makeup of this roster and considering you have a top-5 quarterback in his prime. Of all the things Pete Carroll could have chose to say after yet another disappointing playoff run, he basically says we need to take the ball out of your quarterback's hand more. It's disrespectful to Russell Wilson. And that's why we've seen him more outspoken lately. He knows how good he is. And if Pete Carroll and the Seahawks can't figure that out, Russell Wilson and Sierra will be on to bigger and better things. That's a fact.
I think that was one of the hottest takes we ever had on this show, and I heavily disagree. I think there's nothing to freak out about here. I don't think there's anything truly concerning taking place. I think Russ has seen players speak out recently, like Deshaun Watson and J.J. Watt and OBJ talking with the Browns front office. These things.
He's also seen, just to add to that, he's also seen Tom Brady, one the greatest quarterback of all time, one out of his situation, get to the situation he wanted to get to and win a Super Bowl. But go ahead.
these things are becoming regular. Players talking with their front office, right? And he's thinking, why can't I? I'm Russell Wilson. He's one of the elites across the league, and probably just wanted to point out the fact that the Seahawks haven't done what they can do to maximize his talent. He's been sacked, like you said, Scott, 394 times in his career. He has 8 seasons of getting sacked. 8 seasons of getting sacked 40 or more times, which is the most in NFL history, believe it or not. That's a real concern for a player of his talent. So I think all it is, though, is him wanting to truly notify the Seahawks in a public manner, because maybe then they'll actually do something about it. They can be mad, but they know they won't trade him. He's the cornerstone to their franchise, and Russ loves playing there himself, and he said it multiple times. He's a Seattle native, and he's a humble dude. I think that he realizes, his O-line isn't doing the job he'd prefer they do. But some of that falls onto him as well. And this season, he was charged with 14 sacks that were called his fault, which is tied for second most in the league. And I believe he knows that and wants to fix that. And he will. Russ got to this point in his career because he's a hard worker. He was a 3-star high school prospect who went to North Carolina State, then Wisconsin, then a 3rd-round draft pick, and now he's the Russ we all know. So honestly, I just think he wants Seattle to know that he needs help, but there's nothing more to make of it.
Again, like I said to Matt, I think it's a bit naive to, where there's smoke, there's fire, as the saying goes. And again, I think this is more of a player-coach issue because, again, Pete Carroll is not a young guy. This is a man who's stuck in his ways, who believes his way works. And his way is of the past. The Seahawks made their name being the Legion of Boom, being a dominant defense, a ridiculous secondary. That's not them anymore. The Seattle Seahawks is Russell Wilson. And if you're not doing the things to protect Russell Wilson or give Russell Wilson more weapons to throw the ball, then you're not doing what you need to do to, enhance your franchise quarterback. And again, I think Russell Wilson in the landscape of quarterback autonomy, where dudes are speaking out, dudes are getting their way and, getting what they want, out of franchises. I think this is something that, needs to be paid attention to.
All right, well, as the offseason progresses, it'll definitely be something to keep an eye on, but we will give the football talk a rest for the rest of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking NCAA basketball as predictions for the top 16 teams for March Madness were announced. Stay here for more Chalk Talk. Welcome back to BVM Sports Chalk Talk, where we will discuss some college hoops. Recently, the current top 16 teams were revealed. A lot can change before Selection Sunday, but as of now, the 1 seeds would be Gonzaga, Baylor, Michigan, and Ohio State. Scott, of these top 16 teams, who do you think doesn't quite deserve to be where they are?
Yeah, man, I'm looking right at Alabama and wondering what exactly they've done to earn a number 2 seed. It probably has everything to do with their 12-1 SEC record, but the conference is having a down year with Kentucky and Auburn in particular struggling. Bama is just 1-2 versus top 25 teams this year, with both of those losses coming in the last 3 weeks. They lost to number 24 Oklahoma when the Sooners were without their leading scorer in Austin Reeves and their starting guard due to COVID. Then 2 weeks ago, they just lose to number 18 Missouri after trailing by 16 at the half. That game was over just about as it started. They followed that up with just a 3-point win over South Carolina, who is 5-9 on this season. Jaden Shackelford and John Petty can both hoop, and so can Javon Quinterly, Mr. Jelly. But I'm having a hard time finding the quality wins. They did beat Arkansas and LSU twice now, I believe. But I just don't believe that it warrants a number 2 seed. Their best win by far came over Tennessee in their second SEC game of the season. That was almost about 2 months ago now. I'm looking at Oklahoma, who's 13-5. They've played 4 less games than Alabama, who I already mentioned beat Alabama and also has wins over Texas, West Virginia, Kansas, all top 25 teams. Oklahoma seems to be more deserving number 2 seed. They're the second best team behind Baylor in the second best conference, which is the Big 12. So Alabama, great team. They probably will win the SEC, but again, it's probably about the 5th best conference. They're having a down year this year. So I'm a little confused as to why they are the number 2 seed right now in these initial rankings. I'm sure it'll change by the time March rolls around, but that was the first thing that jumped out to me.
So I have a few things to say about that. Alabama this season has a new head coach in Nate Oates. In the last couple of years, they've lost Colin Sexton and Kira Lewis Jr. to the NBA. And, they're still just getting better and playing the best basketball I've seen them play in most recent school history. They've won 13 out of their last 15 games. Their losses were to, like you mentioned, Oklahoma and Missouri, both ranked teams who deserve some recognition. They're both solid teams. You mentioned all the names: John Petty, Javon Quinterly. You forgot Herb Jones, Jaden Shackelford, Jordan Cooter. this team is legit. They are a top 10 ranked team. So I think being right there in the 2 seed is just right about where they fall. They beat Tennessee. You mentioned that. They beat Florida with Keontae Johnson before, all of that happened. They beat Auburn twice. Auburn, when they got Sharif Cooper back, became a real threat in the SEC. Right now with Sharif Cooper, who's averaging damn near a triple-double. And then they beat Kentucky twice, who Kentucky is obviously having a down year.
Kentucky's been awful this season.
But Kentucky is Kentucky. They still got all the top recruits. Kentucky is Kentucky. And, Alabama has been playing some good basketball this year. And like I said, they're ranked within the top 10. They fall right in that range. So they're going to have to really have a catastrophic, downfall here at the end of the year for them to fall out of that top 2. I think that's exactly where they belong.
Yeah, again, I'm not trying to take anything away from Alabama. I think they are a top 10 team. They're good enough as of right now. But again, it's just the SEC. They're not playing the quality of opponents that some of these Big 12 and some of these Big 10 teams are playing. And again, you mentioned it, those 2 losses, they're against the best 2 teams that they played here recently, and they lost both times. Their best win of the season, as I mentioned, was basically at the beginning of the 2021 year, almost 2 months ago now. So, again, Oklahoma, who beat Alabama, is right there with them. I think should be in that 2 line instead of a 3 line. So, that's how I see that. Again, the SEC champion this year just doesn't hold a ton of weight, especially, as you mentioned, Kentucky is not Kentucky this year, clearly. And, Auburn, who I think we all expected to, kind of build off their momentum over the last couple of years here, they've struggled this year. So, by default, Alabama is the best team in the SEC. But, again, I don't think that holds as much weight as it did in past years. And it certainly, I don't think, warrants the number 2 seed at this point.
Yeah, Scott, I'm going to go right along with you on that same idea of down conferences this year. And the SEC definitely is down. Who would have thought Kentucky would just, play terrible? But the other conference that I have not been impressed with and does not hold weight for me is the ACC. The ACC has been horrible. Duke, North Carolina have been playing bad. Syracuse has not been the same for a long time. And, because of that, I think Virginia is way too high, even as a 3 seed. I don't think that they should be. I think that you look at them more as a 4 or a 5 right now. And although they are leading the ACC, if you look at their schedule, they just have not been impressive because, one, they're beating I understand they're beating the teams that they should beat, but every time they've played a ranked opponent, they have lost. I mean, last night they got blown out by 20 points to 16th ranked Florida State. Almost 2 weeks ago, they lost to 20th ranked Virginia Tech. They got killed by Gonzaga. And then, your only ranked win was against Clemson, who has since just completely fallen off the edge and has not played well. Then you throw into that the fact that they lost to San Francisco at the beginning of the season. They're not scoring a lot. They're only averaging about 69 points a game. They're having poor rebounding this year. That was a big issue with what happened last night against Florida State. And not only that, they're not moving the ball around, and it just doesn't feel, even with Hauser and the guys that they have, it doesn't feel like there's one guy that's going to step up and really take over a game the way that you want to and the way that you need to going into March. And I just think that, because of their past and the history and the success that they had, Bennett is a great coach, and they are in the ACC, and you want to show love to the ACC. They're giving them a little bit higher of a ranking than they should. But I mean, I'd rather take, to your point, I'd take a Big 12 team at 3. I'd give Texas a look. I'd give Texas Tech a look. I'd give even, West Virginia as a 3, but I'd put West Virginia ahead of Virginia and Missouri as well to that point even.
Yeah,
I just
the Big 12 is strong in
Virginia. Yeah. I'm a big Mac McClung fan. Give me Texas Tech. Ooh. I mean, I've not been impressed with Virginia. I think that this is another year where they go into the tournament and they just come out very stale, and they're going to get surprised and blown away by a team that comes in with some momentum and some passion. And that's why I think Virginia is just ranked too high.
Matt, I agree with you. I think Virginia is ranked too high, but at the same time, I don't think the ACC is really weak. A lot of times, and Scott, the same with the SEC. I think a lot of these teams, they're playing against each other and they're beating each other. I think at the same time, that kind of talks to how strong those conferences are. Now, Georgia Tech and a Louisville or whatnot, they can compete with Duke. They can compete with North Carolina. And the same in the SEC, different teams are stepping up. So I think while we look at that as maybe weak, we got to look at it as a strength because there's a lot of teams who could come out of the ACC or the SEC.
I don't think you can make that argument when there's conferences like the Big Ten, who is obviously top and bottom stronger. There's still
and the Big 12
and the Big 12 for sure. There's just more depth in these.
The Big Ten is very top heavy. They have 4 or 5 teams that are really good, and then they have 4 or 5 teams that are really bad. So, I mean, when these teams, you only play so many regular season games so many non-conference games. The majority of these games, North Carolina, Duke, or Alabama, these teams are playing their conference games. So they're losing to guys in their own conference. So I think that kind of almost speaks to the strength of it. But I'm going to talk about a Big Ten team here right now. Illinois. I just don't think Illinois has the makings of a 2 seed. This is hard for me to say because I love Ayo Dosunmu and Kofi Cockburn, but that's essentially all they've got. If a team's game plan against those 2 slows them down, it leaves the game in the hands of Trent Frazier or Georgi Bejenasvili. That's a mouthful, but if you leave it up to them, you're in a bad spot. So
Adam Miller.
That's all right, but they have some concerning losses to Maryland and Rutgers, and they recently have OT wins versus Indiana and Nebraska. Wins are wins, but when it gets to March, to be a 2 seed, you kind of need to be dominating. They've been kind of here and there this season, and when it gets to the madness, being a team like that is ultimately going to get you a quick out. So I think this ranking is kind of based on their top 2 players, which I suppose it makes sense, but they don't have the true makings of a 2 seed. This, to me, is a team that any given night could win big or lose big. They're kind of more of a wild card. Come March and come the Big Ten tournament, we'll see what they're truly made of and learn a little bit more about them, but I don't think they're quite the 2 seed that they're being made out to be right now.
I completely disagree. I think Illinois is just as right as the 2 seed as all the other 2 seeds. Again, Illinois is the 2nd or 3rd best team in the best conference in college basketball, only behind Michigan. You already mentioned the Ayo is averaging almost 22 points a game while shooting almost 50% from the field. And Kofi Cockburn is probably one of the best big men in the entire country. Illinois' only bad loss this season, out of their only 5 losses on the year, is to a Maryland team that's above 500 on the year. I mean, you know what I'm saying? That's really it. Illinois is, again, they're playing the gauntlet of a Big Ten schedule. They have 2 best players. Their 2 best players are going to be probably better than the 2 best players on whoever they play on any given day. Illinois is certainly a top 8 team, and they're more deserving as anybody of a 2 seed.
To that point, I think that's why I'm not big on Virginia, and I think, Scott, that's why you're not big on Alabama. Is you look at what the NCAA has been this year, and it's either you have to have just a perfect team, or your best player has to be better than the best player of the other team.
Exactly.
This is an NCAA season where it's so up in the air. I mean, besides Gonzaga and Baylor, I think anyone can go in and win depending on the night. So
and Gonzaga doesn't play anyone.
I'm taking Illinois top 2.
Gonzaga doesn't play anyone, so you really don't learn about them till it gets to tournament, and that's how it happens here with them. But this is why it's dubbed March Madness. It gets crazy in March. Anyone can beat anyone. So let's make some interesting predictions here. Which mid-major or low-major school do you think could make a Cinderella run at this thing and knock off some of those top teams? Matt, you can go first.
I'm going to go with Belmont. I think Belmont has been a strong team over the last few years. They dominate in that Ohio Valley Conference, and right now, Coach Casey Alexander has his guys playing at their highest level. They're 22-1. They have 5 players averaging double figures a night. They're 12th in points per game. They're 7th in assists. They're 5th in field goal percentage. And they're top 100 when it comes to three-point percentage at about 36%. I mean, this is a team that has a deep bench, that knows what they're made of. They're bringing back a lot of key players like Ohio Valley Conference Defensive Player of the Year, Grayson Murphy. And you know what? They don't have any seniors either. This is a young team. This is an energetic team that still has leadership and has some experience in the tournament, that I think that if they come in and, they get hot, or a team comes out and doesn't respect them or treat them as a serious threat, Belmont can surprise some people and go on a nice little run in March Madness.
Belmont's a solid pick. They've been pretty impressive here recently as, kind of a sleeper in, the March Madness tournament. Loyola Chicago made the Final Four in 2018. And if any small school or mid-major school is going to do it again this year, it's the Ramblers. They're atop the Missouri Valley Conference ahead of a good Drake team. And they're shooting over 51% from the field as a team, which is 3rd in the entire country, behind only number 1 Gonzaga and Stephen F. Austin. Not to mention the best possible thing that could have happened to Loyola happened to them on Sunday. They lost in overtime by 1 point to that aforementioned Drake squad that is, now 20-2 on the season. The Ramblers won 10 consecutive games before that. And I think this loss will, kind of snap their focus back just in time for the tournament. Cameron Crawwig is their leading guy, averaging about 15 points a game.
Scott, I hate to cut you off, but I'm a little confused because
I think you love to cut me off, but go ahead.
When you picked Alabama, you said, they lost 2 games in the last week, even though they're 13 of 15.
Not the last week, the last couple weeks.
You said that's a bad thing, but now Loyola Chicago loses and it's a good thing? I'm a little confused. It's a little contradictory, so that's all I had to say.
So let me walk you through this very simple concept. I said that Alabama, the reason that they're not a 2 seed as opposed they should be a 3 seed, as evidence of that, 2 losses against the only 2 good teams they've played in the last 3 weeks, they lost. Now, Loyola Chicago's has two losses on the season. Again, the one recent one the other night after a 10-game winning streak is against a 20-2 Drake team.
Exactly, against the only good team they played. So Alabama lost to the good teams they played. Loyola lost to the good teams they play, but it's only a benefit to Loyola.
So is this a conversation about whether Loyola should be a top seed or whether they could be possibly a sleeper into the tournament? Which one is that? Aren't these 2 different conversations that we're having?
They are. You're right.
You're the host, right? Shouldn't you know this thing? But anyway, let me Cameron Crawwig is the leading guy for Loyola Chicago, averaging about 15 points a game. He is a point center, kind of a Nikola Jokic type who can pass just as well as he scores from the low block. This Loyola team is deep. Uguak, Tate Hall, Marquise Kennedy off the bench. 7 guys average at least 18 minutes a game, and they can all shoot it. Most of all, Sister Jean is still in the cut at 101 years old as chaplain for the team. The Ramblers are bound for something special with her around.
I like the Sister Jean toss in there, but I think there's a lot of really good basketball being played in the Horizon League that goes unrecognized because they're smaller schools. But there's something that, that's something that come March could be the death of a few top teams. One team that stands out to me is the Wright State Raiders. They're currently 17-4. They're on a 9-game winning streak. In the most recent AP poll results, they were getting votes to be ranked. They're led by big man Loudon Love, who is the team's only senior, averaging a double-double of 17 points and 10 rebounds a night. The rest of his team's contributors are made up primarily of sophomores. They're going to get the job done for their lead senior, who has had an incredible college career. They have the 4th best scoring margin in Division I basketball right now, and they are 2nd in the nation total in rebounds. This is a team flying under the radar because of its conference that come March Madness can send some teams home. But it's not Wright. If it's not Wright State in the tournament, it could be Cleveland State, who's 15-6, coming down the home stretch. I just think the Horizon League has some talent that goes unrecognized because in the last decade, they created players like Gordon Hayward, Norris Cole, Ray McCallum, Ryan Brokoff, Kate Felder, Keeper Sykes, Kendrick Nunn. I know you're a Kendrick Nunn guy, Scott. So
love Kate Nunn. It's the Chicago boy. He's a demon.
Exactly, and that list is just going to continue to grow. So give me a Horizon League team to do some damage come tourney time. We want to give you all another thanks for tuning in this week, and as March nears, we will continue to have plenty to talk about. The best time of year is right around the corner. We will see you next week for more Chalk Talk.